Johnston. I'm Jeremy Anderson.
I'm Tanya Mosley. It's here and now. Coming up, Republicans last night focused on criminal justice, but not on the police reform states have been consolidated. Senator Shelley Moore Capito says Republicans should be leading on racism and policing.
This is one of the things the party should be talking about because I think we have plans, and I think that we acknowledge that this is a deep-seated issue in our country.
Also comparing COVID-19 in the U.S. to the situation in Europe, where cases are much lower. In France, schools will reopen for in-person learning.
All schools nationwide are opening next week, and every child is expected to be back in school.
And the latest on the very powerful Hurricane Laura, which will make landfall overnight. Coming up, here and now.
The news is first. Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Windsor Johnston. Forecasters say the impact from Hurricane Laura will be severe when it makes landfall along the U.S. Gulf Coast later tonight. The city of Lake Charles, near the Texas-Louisiana border, is in the direct path of what is now expected to come ashore as a catastrophic Category 4 hurricane. Rosemary Westwood of member station WWNO reports the area is under an evacuation order. The threats to Lake Charles are multiple and extremely serious. Storm surge, hurricane-force winds, and possibly days following the storm without electricity, water, or sewer services. But Mayor Nick Hunter said not enough people are leaving ahead of the storm's early impacts expected later today.
We're pleading with them right now to stop the internal debate, stop the waffling, and get out of Lake Charles.
State officials are comparing the storm to Hurricane Rita, which devastated the area in 2005, just a month after Hurricane Katrina. Hunter called this his last-ditch effort to get the city's roughly 78,000 people out of town. For NPR News, I'm Rosemary Westwood in New Orleans. Authorities in Kenosha, Wisconsin are investigating after two protesters were shot dead last night. It was the third night of clashes sparked by a police shooting that left a black man critically injured. NPR's Julie McCarthy reports additional National Guard troops have been deployed to protect first responders and government property.
Fears of vigilantism are rising in the city of some 100,000, where protests for racial justice and police accountability have taken a dangerous turn. A group of men with guns congregated near a gas station in the center of the city, not far from the courthouse, where clashes between police and protesters have erupted nightly since the shooting of Jacob Blake. The gas station became a flashpoint where protesters and the group claiming to protect private property faced off verbally. Around midnight, shots were fired, and 3 people were struck, 2 fatally, according to Kenosha Sheriff David Beth. Beth told the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel that police are looking for a man captured on video holding a long gun. He said the shootings validated his fear about armed civilians. Julie McCarthy, NPR News, Kenosha, Wisconsin.
China is accusing the U.S. of sending a spy plane into a no-fly zone to trespass on live military exercises being conducted by Beijing. NPR's Emily Feng reports the alleged incident comes amid escalating military and diplomatic tensions between the U.S. and China, specifically over the South China Sea.
China called the spy plane activity an act of naked provocation. China did not specify where the fire drills were happening when they say the U.S. spy plane flew over them. Beijing is threatening to
who have been crushed by this virus, and the overwhelming amount of whom behaved incredibly responsibly in trying to get themselves to the position where they could safely reopen.
A formal announcement is expected later today, but according to NewJersey.com, the rules will be similar to ones implemented in New York when gyms there reopened this week. Gyms in the Garden State were ordered closed in March, but they have been permitted to offer outdoor workouts. And the NAACP's Philadelphia chapter has voted to dissolve its control to the organization's co-leader. June. The move comes after the organization's new former president, Bobby Wilson, who led Philadelphia chapter since 2004, until today, saying he welcomed the transition. Tribune reports they plan to appoint a new administrator to the chapter next month. Currently 80 degrees in Philadelphia at 106. Sun's highs near 83 tonight. Partly cloudy, lows in the tomorrow mostly sunny, highs in the mid-90s. This is
For NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Capital One Banking lets people manage their money anytime, anywhere. Capital One. This is banking reimagined. What's in your world? Capital One NA.
from NPR and WBUR, I'm Tanya Mosley. President Trump's family took center stage, including his wife Melania, who made a personal appeal to her husband.
From the day that I met him, has always wanted to have a discussion with the rest of his family. I was frustrated, and I'm so proud to see the many things he has done in such a short time. America is in his heart. So while at times we only see the worst of people and politics on the evening news, let's remember how we come together in the most difficult times.
The First Lady also spoke to two major challenges facing the country right now, the pandemic and the demands for racial justice. To reflect more on this, including police reform efforts in Congress, we're joined by West Virginia Republican Senator Shelley Moore Capito. Senator, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on, Tanya.
Well, Senator, first reaction to Melania Trump's speech. Her positive tone was in contrast to the vision presented by other parts of the convention.
Well, I think if there's anyone who knows the president and sees day to day where his heart is and where his areas of compassion and passion are, it would certainly be Melania Trump as our First Lady. She has actually visited here in West Virginia with me to go and see victims of the opioid crisis. So I thought that it was reflected well in her presentation yesterday, and I thought she did a nice job.
We heard a lot about criminal justice reform in this convention, as I mentioned. We also heard a lot about supporting law enforcement, but we didn't hear a lot or anything really about the police violence that's been the cause of the unrest that we see in many cities over the last few nights, specifically because of what happened in Wisconsin. In June, you told NPR that you do think there's racial discrimination in our law enforcement and that the law is not colorblind. Is that a belief out of step with your party?
You know, I don't believe it's necessarily out of step. I think it's a very difficult discussion for us to have. And the criminal justice reform was a major victory over decades, 2 decades, I believe, of trying to get more fairness and more second chances built into our system. You know, I did a lot of investigating with our local police officers, and I, asked that question: is there racism in the department or in the policy? Basically, the answer I got not so much was a blatant yes, there's racism, but it was that we've got a lot of work to do. We need more training. That's why I joined with Senator Tim Scott to work on the bill that we put forward. So I still think this is very much something that we need to work on. And And I do acknowledge that it exists, and I think Mike Patty acknowledges this because he put forward a great bill 3 or 4 months ago that was unacceptable to the other side.
But what you're saying speaks to nuance, and do you believe that that's missing from this convention?
Well, I think, first of all, we're only halfway through the convention, and I think there's lots to cover. I think the first thing on a lot of people's minds is what's going on with the pandemic and COVID, and I think that's been addressed in certain areas. Certainly the nurse from West Virginia talked about the importance of telehealth. I think you're going to see more areas being hit, and hopefully with all that we see going on in this country, I think this is one of the things our party should be talking about, because I think we have plans. I think we have an empathetic view, and I think that we acknowledge that this is a deep-seated issue in our country.
I want to ask you about some of the breaks with tradition and policy. Last night, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo broke from State Department policy and gave a convention speech while on an official trip to Jerusalem. There was a naturalization ceremony at the White House with Homeland Security Secretary Chad Wolf giving a speech in apparent violation of the Hatch Act. Do you worry about the precedent set by this norm breaking?
You know, we had a certain way of also doing a convention with the big halls and the big speeches. So I think some of the norms were broken anyway. I'll leave the discussion as to whether this is a violation of the Hatch Act. I am sure that all of that was considered. I'm sure that Secretary Pompeo probably took great care to make sure that he had a segregated presentation that was paid for and created by the RNC. And I'm sure that all of this will be investigated if it needs to be. Personally, I think it rounds out what the president has done and presents it in just a different way.
Before I let you go, the House passed a relief bill more than 3 months ago. Republicans and Democrats still have not compromised on a new relief bill. Most unemployed people are not seeing that extra $300 of redirected FEMA money in their unemployment checks. What needs to happen on the relief bill?
Well, this has been very frustrating for me because I have a state that has been very prudent with the dollars that we've received, and we still have people that are hurting. And so our governor is applying for the additional FEMA money on unemployment, which I think is a good move on his part. And also, he's been very deliberate in how to try to help our cities and counties, because there's a portion in the new bill that would give the governors more flexibility to allow those cities and counties to replace tax revenues, and that's really important to me. And maybe more directed dollars to our cities and counties. But I just think that the bargaining, my understanding is that there hasn't been enough compromise. I'm disappointed that we can't reach a consensus here, but I'm ever hopeful, as I always am.
West Virginia Republican Senator Shelley Moore Capito, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Hurricane Laura is swiftly moving towards the coasts of Texas and Louisiana and is expected to make landfall as a Category 4 storm tonight. More than 500,000 people have been ordered to evacuate, which is, of course, complicated because of the pandemic. Ray Hawthorne is a meteorologist with the Florida Public Radio Emergency Network and joins us now. Ray, the National Hurricane Center calls this a formidable hurricane. Is it expected to strengthen further from where we are right now?
It looks like it. The storm is over warm water. The winds high up in the atmosphere are light, and so it looks like it is going to continue to strengthen for several more hours. There are some indications of some stronger upper-level winds right as the hurricane approaches the coast tonight, which could weaken it a little bit, but it's really not going to be enough to prevent this from being a major event.
So what does that mean? What are you anticipating here? How severe could the damage be?
Very severe. So the storm surge, which is the amount of water level rise of normally dry ground, is forecast to be 10 to 20 feet above normally dry ground, and that surge could extend 30 miles inland over parts of far southeastern Texas and southwestern Louisiana. So it looks like Jefferson County, Texas into Cameron Parish, Louisiana could be some of the worst areas hit by this, but the surge will extend outside of that. If you think about it in these terms, that would be about the height of 2 average adult humans. So just really incredible surge.
And what about wind and rain?
Yeah, so forecast winds are expected to be over 100 miles per hour near higher east where the center crosses. This is a very large hurricane, Jeremy. Hurricane force winds extend outward up to about 70 miles from the center, and tropical storm force winds extend outward up to 175 miles. So there are likely to be tropical storm force winds as far west as the Houston and Galveston area, and as far east perhaps as New Orleans. Rainfall, we're looking at rainfall amounts between about 8 and 12 inches. There will be areas that receive 15 inches or more of rain or more, extending far inland into parts of Arkansas and also into Oklahoma as well.
One of the things that was so surprising about this storm is that it was just a tropical storm yesterday, and now we're looking at the possibility of a Category 4 hurricane tonight. As we remember, there are only 5 categories. Why did it gain so much strength so quickly?
Yeah, there are 3 primary factors. The first is the water in the Gulf of Mexico is quite warm, and that warm water extends fairly to the ocean surface. That's a big part of it. Also, the winds higher up in the atmosphere have become quite a bit lighter over the last 24 to 36 hours. For hurricanes to get stronger, the winds high up in the atmosphere have to be light, and we've seen that. And the third factor is the moisture in the atmosphere. So dry air can prohibit hurricanes from strengthening. In this case, the relative humidities have come up in the middle and upper parts of the atmosphere, and that is why that Laura has strengthened quite a bit over the last day or so.
Now, you mentioned Arkansas, you mentioned Oklahoma. What are we expecting this storm to do as it continues to weaken over land?
Yeah, so the weakening will definitely take place once it gets inland. Unfortunately, the storm is very strong to start, and it's moving quickly toward the northwest at about 15 miles per hour. So it looks like hurricane force winds, Jeremy, could extend as far almost to Shreveport, and tropical storm warnings extend into parts of southeastern Oklahoma, southern Arkansas. So we're going to see wind damage and power outages very far inland from this storm. Also, lots of heavy rain and strong gusty winds moving into parts of the Tennessee and Ohio valleys as well coming up by Friday.